The child was born but couldn't sit still. 86 years later with no regret. You know that man can't sit still yet. The Great Depression couldn't get him down. He worked for his dad's store in town, collecting money in small amounts for poor whites and blacks in their furniture accounts. Stetson Kennedy wants us all to be free. Stetson Kennedy wants us all to be free. As he'd collect, he'd talk to folks. Hear legends, tales, songs, and jokes. Now this fine treasure he'd record and write. He was colorblind, didn't see black and white. Writer's project for the WPA. Zora Neale Hurston, he earned his pay. Crackers and blacks, they talk for hours. It was a barefoot history in this land of flowers.
WBRNRadio presents The Week That Was on the 18th of November 2016. The saga goes on in the state of Alabama. And now Al Franken is in the middle of the fray there. DJ Trump had commented about it, calling him Al Frankenstein. Terribly, well, let's see what the Al Frankenstein comment here from DJ Trump, calling the situation bad, basically, is where he ended up with it there, with all of the other types of machinations going on here. Horrible lies, threatened to sue. Anyway, that's what Trump called the women that accused him. Of course, you had Roger Ailes and all those people sandwiched in between. Sarah Sanders, the press secretary, pushed back against the idea that Trump treats Democrats differently than Republicans, pointed Trump's comments of concern over Moore's allegations. He hadn't mentioned Moore since that date. So he's been very, very quiet about it. When he returned, he told reporters aboard the Air Force One that basically, let's see, what's he commenting about this time? Believes that the allegations are true. Moore would do the right thing and step aside, but he hasn't had any comments about it at all. Back to this tweet here, he called him Al Frankenstein. Picture is really bad. He wrote on Twitter misspelling the nickname. Anyway, it doesn't really. To think that just a week later he was lecturing anyone who would listen about sexual harassment and respecting women. It goes back to Leslie Stahl tape. Old Hash Franken was a comedy writer at the time, and of course Trump and his infamous Access Hollywood tape. We don't need to say any more about it. We have time here. The Governor Ivey in Alabama had a little press conference for about 3 minutes and supported. She would vote for Roy Moore. However, reluctantly or not reluctantly, you'll hear that at the last of our broadcast. But anyway, let's move on to Missoula, Montana, the Bozeman, Montana, the Missoulian, I think is the name of the newspaper. Nonetheless, this is about Greg Ganefort, the congressman there elect, and the incident with the Guardian reporter, and how he, as they say, enhanced the story. Ben Jacobs of the Guardian. The audio interview with him was finally released. They asked. Released by the Chronicle after citing him. Anyway, the Chronicle requested the documents back in June, and after Guilford, Jacobs, and the Gallatin County Attorney Lambert did not object to the release, it was finally released. The judge ruled the documents could be released. The Chronicle received its copy. The audio interview of Ganefort, I hope I pronounced his name, comes from a recording made by a Sergeant Sencor outside of Ganefort's Discovery Drive headquarters. He has a software company there, and Greg Ganefort just body slammed me. You know the story there. What do you mean by body slam? Sector said he picked me up and he slammed me on the ground. Strong man there. My elbow hurts, etc. That's from Jones. And the approximate 4-minute conversation, however, said that Jacobs, who grabbed his wrist after trying to struggle, Ganefort told the sergeant that he was preparing for an interview with a crew from Fox News. After Jacobs stuck the microphone in my face again, Ganefort said, when the struggle ensued, I probably shouldn't have done that anyway. This is pretty much old hash here. In addition to Jacobs and Ganefort, a team of investigators from the sheriff's office interviewed 8 other witnesses. Multiple witnesses said that Ganefort was the aggressor and reported seeing him punch Jacobs. So that was basically how that went along then, and various other people that were in it, or around it, I should say, in the report. Secor said he contacted the sheriff patrol commander, somebody named Wagner, Jake Wagner, to say he believed there was a possible cause to charge Ganefort, I guess is how you pronounce that. Anyway, he was cited for a misdemeanor. That story is there. A different question is out there. And, of course, he beat Ron Queese in a special election. And he, of course, pled guilty to the charge, received a 6-month deferred sentence, and was also ordered to perform 40 hours of community service, completed 20 hours of anger management and pay of $385. He's a multi-millionaire, nothing for him. To settle any potential civil lawsuits from Jacobs, Ganefort donated $50,000 to the Committee to Protect Journalists and issued a written apology to Mr. Jacobs. And the county attorney, Marty Lambert, who is also a Republican, said he was aware of Ganefort's comments to investigators, but did not consider additional charges such as obstructive justice because authorities were focused on the assault allegation. He lied, and when the police are investigating a case, suspects of crime will say misleading statements. And exactly what happened here is not a crime per se to lie to coppers. Well, that is in effect true, but the general rule, back to obstruction of justice, those charges can be filed against people that do not lie to them, and usually that is the case. And it is just one of those little charges that they tend to trip people up on. Let me move on from this affair here with Ganefort to Keystone. Last night we talked about Keystone, and this is some anecdotal information here in the Ravenly Republic. I'm not sure who they are, but anyway, they're somewhere in Montana. This is on the Keystone. The vote will come, as we were talking about before, the Nebraska Commission on Monday. What is that commission called? The Nebraska Public Service Commission scheduled a rule if the Keystone Pipeline proposal by TransCanada can cross the state. The decision is a major regulatory hurdle for the pipeline. It's been on the federal review since 2008. This pipeline in Marshall County, South Dakota, near the North Dakota border, about 250 miles west of Minneapolis. It's out there, I guess. Nonetheless, they will vote on it. The new pipeline could carry an estimated 830,000 barrels of oil a day from the Sand Oil area in Canada. The decision will hinge on testimony and documents generated in public hearings over the summer, and from more than 500,000 public comments. That's according to Deb Collins. She's there. Law passed prevents the commission from fostering a pipeline safety and over possibility of leaks into the decision. Factoring in, I'm sorry. Anyway, so since they just recently had the pipeline leak, they can't put it in the decision. That was a 2011 law, no doubt recently passed by the petroleum interests. Opponents of the XL pipeline, there's a reason TransCanada and the big oil lobbies do not want this information on the record. As director of Bold Alliance, that is Jane Kibble, anyway, has opposed for about 10 years. DJ Trump has already given his green light, and officials in South Dakota said they weren't notified. And this is something we didn't have last week about the leak for roughly 5 hours. I guess so they covered things up. That's from Brian Walsh. He is an environmental science manager at the South Dakota Department of Environment and Natural Resources. Such as officials would likely inquire about the delay, but we're focusing immediately on the spill. No doubt. A spokesman for TransCanada, somebody named Matthew John, said the company will need to do extensive testing along with federal regulators' independent testing facilities before they can pinpoint the cause. An aerial photo released by TransCanada on Twitter that the company says is of the spill shows a darkened area on flat agricultural land. Residents near the site report a surge of activity as the cleanup crews arrive. And Susan Easterhouse, she's manager of Front Porch in Langford, the city southeast of the spill, said the restaurant will be catering for TransCanada workers at the site. Eastern House said she served Friday supper and middle of the day, and middle of the night shift, about 80 people with 100 people coming on Saturday. So that's the Easter House said she had mixed emotions about the pipeline, a tug between the business has it brought to the area and her environmental concerns. She thinks the spill will have lasting effects in the area. At least Ms. Easterhouse is honest. And let's see, and it's almost like everybody fears has come true. Easterhouse said it's not the notoriety we really want in small town South Dakota. No doubt, and not evidently wanting to deal with that particular reality. Let's get this story up here. This is from the Pew People. We usually use some of their materials. On veterans, this would have been a good Veteran Day story. Didn't have it then, just got it tonight. Changing face of Americans veterans, some things I didn't know. There are around 20.4 million veterans in 2016, according to data from the Department of Veterans Affairs, representing less than 10%, no doubt, of the adult population. As well, anyway, that's already been observed. The largest share of all veterans, the Gulf War types, according to the population estimates there were 6.8 million veterans who served in Vietnam era and 7.1 million who served in the Gulf War era, which spans from, you're dealing with from August of 1990 through the present. Some serve in both eras. There were also about 771,000, unbelievable that, World War II veterans, and 1.6 million who served during the Korean War. And these are just estimates now. About 3/4, 77% of veterans served during a wartime, 23% towards peacetime. The share of the population with military experience is declining. In 2016, 7% of adults were veterans, down from 18% in 1980, according to the Census Bureau. This drop coincided with a decrease in active duty personnel over the past half century. The number of active duty personnel has dropped significantly from 3 to 5 million in 1968 during the era to 1.3 million, less than 1% of adults in today's all-voluntary Army. The VA projects the number of veterans will continue to decline in the coming decade. By 2045, the department there will be around 12 million veterans, roughly a 40% decrease from the current number. By the time Gulf War era vets are projected to make up a majority of vets, and most who served in Vietnam era earlier will be dead, no doubt. In 45, we'll all be gone. It's a long time away. Let's see, demographics expect to change. Currently, 9 in 10 veterans, 91% are men, while 9% are women. By 2045, the share of women is expected to double to 18%. The number of female veterans is also projected to increase from 1.9 million in 2016 to 2.2 million in 2045. Male veterans, on the other hand, are projected to drop by almost half, from 18.5 million to 9.8 million. Should be more. Projections also indicate that veterans' populations will be slightly younger, with 35% of veterans younger than 50, compared with 27% in 2016. As the overall U.S. population continues to age, the share of veterans 50 to 69 is expected to shrink from 39% to 33%, while the share of 70 and older is projected to be around a third of the total, 34% by 2045. With these trends, overall veteran population is predicted to become more racially and ethnically diverse. The share of veterans who are non-Hispanic or Europeans is expected to drop from 77% to 64%. The share of veterans who are Latinos is expected to double from 7 to 13%, while the share of African Americans is expected to increase. That's an interesting figure, from 12 to 16. Used to be much more than that. Fewer members of Congress have prior military experience. In the current Congress, 20% of the senators and 19% of the representatives have prior military experience, down drastically from a decade ago. The share of senators who are veterans reached a post-Korean War peak of 81% in 1975, while the share amongst House members peaked to 75%. Those in 1975 were World War II and Korean veterans. Totally different situation there. The Department of Veteran Affairs receives a lower favorability rating. Roughly half of adults, 49%, have a favorable view of the VA, 34% an unfavorable view of the VA. We put this up on Facebook and run with it. Uncle Carl, we'll get to Uncle. 2 tax reforms that can be better than one. For the talk of difference between the draft and the House passed theirs. He's writing, incidentally, on the 16th of November in the Wall Street Journal. Let's run through the list of what both bills do. Place the principal emphasis on growth and secondary emphasis on tax simplification. Check and check. Gives middle-class filers a big tax break by doubling the standard deduction, increasing the child care credit, cutting the rate for middle class. Check. Cut the corporate rate to 20%. Even double the taxation on foreign profits. Provide for repatriation of profits. Standard. Check. Credit for this wide agreement goes to tax reform, the Gang of Six. We talked about the Gang of Six before. That's the Speaker, Old Man Ryan, and the Old Man McConnell, Kevin Brady, the Orrin Hatch, and from the other end, the Treasury Secretary Wacko Meachon, whatever his name is, Gary Cohn, Director of the National Economic Council. The bunch began meeting in the spring in Old Man McConnell's office, and but the gang's closed-door meetings drew predictable criticism, lesser lights in both chambers. The gang ignored the hubbub. Anyway, the work took on a new urgency after the Senate failed in September to repeal Obamacare. It became clear if the Republicans failed on tax reform too, it would be a hard-fought, epic proportion rout in 2018. There are some differences between the House and Senate version, but we come up to date more on this since he wrote that. In some cases, this will lead to a better final bill. Take the deduction for state, and this is the big argument. The House would eliminate deduction for state income tax and sales tax, but to provide a deduction up to $10,000 in property tax. Consider the impact in New Jersey. Their property taxes are below $10,000 for 90% of filers, with the biggest standard deduction and the lowest, as many as 10% of taxpayers with higher property would be better off than today. The Senate killed the state and local deduction altogether. Easy for it to do since there isn't a single Republican senator from a big tax state. With the legislation going to conference, the Senate hardliners will help limit how generous the House leaders want it to be. But many Republicans from tax-heavy states already recognize what Tim Reed is saying. The House version of the deduction would help his constituents in Western New York, whereas current law benefits people in Manhattan and subsidizes Albany's mania for, well. On the other differences between the two proposals are less significant. The House has just 4 brackets for individuals, which is simple. The Senate would keep a 7, not that simple at all. And both plans have enough for simplification built in. 90% or more Americans could file just their returns. Well, that's where the devil comes in there, and of details. And then there's a Senate attempt to repeal Obamacare. That's up and down right there. Yet, Mr. Sees, this is Orrin Hatch, seems confident he has the votes if he works it correctly. Well, I'm not sure where Mr. Hatch is here on this. So let's see if we... Towns and cities, fear trickle down. I think we already talked about this. Maybe we didn't. We will talk about it. Part of the problem here is that many small towns, this article in the Post, that fear this because they give one example here of Pataskara, Ohio. 9 ballot measures of 15,000 people live in the town. The most rural community was finally won over by a century-old landmark of the tax code. The $5 million levy could be deducted from a federal tax. And that may not happen now in small towns and thriving cities in Republican and Democratic-leaning states. The local leaders are warning that the $1.5 trillion, you can imagine that, moving through the Congress threatens to undermine their ability to raise money for government, including police, schools, etc. The House bill passed would allow people to deduct only $10,000 in property tax from their federal income tax, while the Senate bill movement would eliminate it. Anyway, from the League of Cities, I'm hearing from our representatives across the nation, it's just inside the belt. It's not just an inside the beltway conversation. That is from Esparzola Diggs. Anyway, words that weary residents might balk at future tax increases that will in doubt happen in San Diego County, drawing up plans for local tax increase to provide long-term housing to the homeless. Also, word in San Diego, the elimination of what is commonly called SALT deduction would affect a third of the households. That's from Greg Cox, a member of the Board of Supervisors. The average median resident would lose $16,000 deduction. That's quite a big deduction right there. The fate of the tax deductions among the thorniest issues from Republican lawmakers. About 44 million Americans a year take the advantage of the tax break to collectively save $60 billion. That's what it's all about. That's a big percentage there. Conservatives have been long complaining about deductions and windfall for high tax. Anyway, according to the Conservative Tax Foundation, taxpayers in 6 states, we pointed these out before, California, Illinois, New Jersey, New York, Pennsylvania, and Texas, claim more than half of the dollar value of the deduction. No doubt about that. Republicans have repeatedly tried to eliminate the provision, most recently in an attempt led by Reagan in '86. Oh, Reagan didn't make it. Will these clowns here make it? It's hard to say. The question is, should taxpayers in low-tax states be subsidizing in high-tax states? They'll call them high-tax states, but one thing to always remember, progress is made in states from a general standpoint that have higher levels of taxation because they can provide more things to make the community livable, which attracts the Amazons of the world. You're not going to attract the Amazons of the world to a bunch of potholes, dirt roads, water that's not properly treated, schools that are willy-nilly, like in Mississippi and most of the South, including Texas. It's ridiculous. Greg Fisher, he's the mayor of Louisville, Kentucky, including top officials. Well, he just skipped old man McConnell. City leaders speaking out against eliminating deduction and sometimes pitting themselves in the wards of their representatives, no doubt about that, but the representatives are not representing them. The National Education Association estimates that $370 billion for public education would be at risk over the next decade. Under the Senate plan, $250 billion under the House plan. So in other words, they're not any good for education when state legislatures decide what they need to fund schools, public libraries, fire departments. They do the math. That is from Lily Garcia. They say this is a burden on taxpayers that we'll be able to reasonably deduct it on the federal level. And see, this is a situation where you are basically pitting low-tax, non-sustainable locations against sustainable locations that enjoy a better standard of living for the most part. That is what it is all about. If you don't invest money in schools, as a rule, you usually don't have very good schools. So first of all, your infrastructure is not very good. Your better teachers, if they can find a place to flee to, do flee. And in many of these open district states, people flee one school system to another school system as long as they can get a transport to get there or whatever. So that is where it's all stacking up as the economy is more and more global. The fight for better schools, better surroundings to live in. You don't want to live your life in an area that you have chemical plants there, dark, cold clouds and those kinds of things, unless you just absolutely have to. And that is a situation in some communities. People have no place to go because they can't afford to move and really can't afford to stay. So those are some of the problems that are out here. Connery, 40 miles north of Houston, has grown fast in recent years. Steve Williams, the assistant city administrator, began working there in 2005. It had 35,000 residents. Today it has 83,000 members. But it's creating a boom in new home construction. That usually always happens. But demand for schools, our concern is that individual tax liability goes up. Residents are going to pare back on support for school bonds and funding for local services. So in other words, Usually these residents start at the schools because particularly it depends on how many people have school-age kids. If they don't, they tend to pare those back. But then they have to start cutting the budget elsewhere. So public safety starts to suffer. The streets fall apart, etc. And then you have a situation that is not very good at all. Local governments fear aren't confirmed to the effect of removing state and local deduction. Officials in districts and other cities also worried about the House plan to repeal a form of tax-exempt financing for development called private activity bonds. These bonds, which help lure private investors to low-income housing projects and other civic endeavors by effectively allowing them to borrow at municipality low interest rates, have resulted in 9,000 units of affordable housing in a district since 2010. So these are some of the things that are happening there. If it weren't for these private activity bonds, as far as Dick said, many cities would be unable to expand their airports, and this is where the rubber tends to meet the road even more so. Let's do the sports now. As we move around here, let's just check on the time because we have to add. We have to add in. We're all right. We have to add in a little piece there from Governor Ivey down in Alabama, and she does have an authentic Alabamian accent, no doubt. Makes Judge Moore sound like a Philadelphia lawyer compared to her. All right. From the NBA here, and we'll look at a little bit of college football. There were some games, I believe, tonight. And Jerry Jones evidently made an insensitive remark. Well, we'll get that another day, maybe on the Monday morning quarterback. Anyway, these are the scores from last night. As soon as our mechanism changes here. So Uncle Carl was not at all, as they say, where he should have been. The Pistons were in Indiana. The pace is 109-100. The Heat in Washington. The Heat won 91-86. The Jazz were in Brooklyn. The Nets 118-107 for the Jazz. In overtime, the Clippers and Cavaliers in Cleveland. The Cavaliers 118-113. The Knickerbockers and Raptors in Toronto. Raptors 107-84. The Hornets were in Chicago. Bulls 123-120. The Thunder were in San Antonio. Spurs 104-101. The T-Wolves were in Dallas. T-Wolves 111-87 for the Mavericks. Mr. Cuban's not a very happy man. The Trailblazers were at the Kings. Kings 86-82. The Pelicans at the Nuggets in Denver. Nuggets 146-114. And the Suns were in Los Angeles, and they beat the Lakers 122-113. Before we forget, the humanitarian civil rights activist from Chicago, the Reverend Jesse Jackson, announced he has Parkinson's disease, and people of good standings, etc., should go to Twitter and Facebook and wish him well in his struggle against Parkinson's disease. His father, incidentally, had Parkinson's, and Jesse is 76, I believe he is. Nonetheless, let's see. This is Saturday. I don't know what we have. I will have to look. Do we have Friday night scores or not? Well, maybe we do somewhere down here. We gave the Saturday, I guess this is week 12. The scoreboard, well, I guess we'll prepare for Bama to play tomorrow at noon. They play Mercer. We won't go over all these. Number 4, Oklahoma and Kansas. That's a 3 o'clock game. Navy and Notre Dame at 3:30. We won't get all these. Nebraska and Penn State at 4. The Maryland and number 17, Michigan State. Michigan State's kind of down there. California, Stanford, that's out west. That'll be at 8 o'clock. Air Force and Boise. And Utah and Washington, University of Washington, number 18. And that is that for college basketball. I guess that is all, as they say, from that statement. I was looking at some of the general stuff. Can Wisconsin remain undefeated? Will Michigan spoil the Badgers situation? I don't know. I think that's with Michigan State. Anyway, we'll see. We'll on the Monday morning quarterback, and we have. I'm not sure we'll have Sunday program or not, but if we do, we'll have all this information there. As you know now, in our time they did not. They now have a playoff series. Excuse me, for college football. Very interesting there, and I guess we'll have to ask Paula a little bit more about this, Laxo. Anyway, this will do it for us. Have a good weekend, everyone. We will talk to you as Bostonred on the Monday morning quarterback, and as numbers man, macroeconomics program coming up very soon. Also, we invite you on some of these outlets. Robert Mugabe, an African hero for all times, about the so-called hybrid, that's the word I wanted to get today when I was doing that broadcast, is what we call a coup there, a coup that they're trying to make appear to the world. That is not a coup. Anyway, you can find that on Spreaker and some of the other outlets on YouTube, on Stitcher, and various others. Good day.
I will cast my ballot on December the 12th, and I do believe that the nominee of the party is the one I'll vote for. I believe in the Republican Party and what we stand for, and most important, we need to have a Republican in the United States Senate to vote on the things like Supreme Court justices, other appointments that the Senate has to confirm and make major decisions. And so that's what I plan to do, is vote for the Republican nominee, Roy Moore.
Tom. Governor, are you going to be proud of your vote for Roy Moore?
Every Alabamian has a right and duty to vote to determine who their U.S. Senate person is going to be from Alabama. And yes, I'm proud to vote, and I hope every Alabamian will be proud to cast their vote.
And do you believe any of the women that have brought accusations against Roy Moore?
I certainly have no reason to disbelieve any of them. The timing is a little curious, but at the same time, I have no reason to disbelieve them.
Mary? Oh, okay.
Governor, previously you said you needed more facts. What changed?
Well, the information and facts continue to come in, but everybody needs to be sure that they go to vote on December the 12th. And everybody will cast their ballot. Like every Alabamian, I'll cast my ballot.
Did the party make the right decision leaving him as the nominee, you believe?
I believe they did. It's a process that you go through where the people of Alabama choose who's going to represent their party, and it goes through the process, and you wind up with a candidate from the Democratic Party and a candidate from the Republican Party. And we've been through part of that process, and now we are at the time in the process where those two who've been selected by the respective parties are voted on in the general election by the people of Alabama, and that's where we are.
Governor, do you plan to delay or cancel?
I'm sorry?
Do you plan to delay or cancel the election?
No, I changed the election once so that the people of Alabama could vote early and have their say, and also I swore to uphold the Constitution and the laws of Alabama, and there's a specific law that spells out the process. So no, there's no reason to change the date.
I'm going to take two more questions. It's here and then Lauren.
Going forward, do you think this will affect next year's state elections?
Do I think what will?
This will supporting Roy Moore.
If anything, I hope it's going to encourage everybody to vote. We have low voter turnout sometimes in these elections, and we need to have more people voting their convictions in every election. So I hope it will spur people on to see the importance of voting in every election.
Lauren.
Governor, you said you don't disbelieve these women. As you listen to their stories, as a woman yourself, how does it make you feel?
There's never an excuse for or rationale for sexual misconduct or sexual abuse. It bothers me.
If it bothers you, does that at all go into your decision making when you decide to vote for him?
You consider all this information that you have, certainly it has an impact. But at the same time, the United States Senate needs to have, in my opinion, a majority of Republican votes to carry the day in when they have to consider other major decisions. So that's a factor as well.
All right. Thank you, everybody.